Volume, 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 volume. So you started the season with Joe Burrow, Austin Eckler. Who was the wide receiver? So you started the season with Joe Burrow, Austin Eckler, Xavier Worthy, maybe George Kittle. Things aren't looking good, but there's always bargains to be found on the waiver wire. I'm going to take you through all of the best waiver wire pickups, plus some names you definitely should be dropping from your fantasy teams on the Fantasy First Down. I'm Ben Wasley. Welcome to the Fantasy First Down. It's week 3, and we are talking waiver wire again. If you haven't already, make sure you like and follow on YouTube. Plus, you can check out my rankings over at ffdfantasyfootball.com. If you got any questions or comments about waivers, or you just want to join everyone on Instagram and fight me about Bashal Tootin, then you can hit me up in the comments or over on Instagram at the Fantasy First Down, or on Twitter at Fantasy First Down with no O. But today we are talking waiver pickups and we're talking plays that you definitely should drop. Let's get into it, and we'll start off with the QBs. And as always, my favorite 4 QB waiver pickups. And for me, Caleb Williams has been someone I've liked going into the season, and he has paid off solidly so far. Gets a good matchup against Dallas. We've seen teams be able to have success against them through the air so far this season. He's my favorite pickup in a shallower league. If you're in a slightly deeper league, well, Drake Bay remains a solid option. It was okay last week against Miami, and he takes on Pittsburgh, who has been surprisingly susceptible through the air. If you're in a deeper league, well, Daniel Jones is probably someone that may have been picked up already after his good first week, but after 2 good weeks, he's someone that's going to be very tempting, especially if you need a replacement longer term, with Joe Burrow being out or one of the many other quarterback injuries we're getting at the moment. Having said that, it is worth noting that he takes on the Titans, and they have been tough to pass on, especially when the Titans are at home. So keep that in mind if you're planning on starting him this week. Kind of the same deal with Jake Browning, who I do think could be a good replacement for someone like a Burrow long term. We do know he can be effective through the air, even though he's no Joe Burrow. He can still finish as a top 12 quarterback in every given week. He's someone that's going to be available in pretty much every league, given that Burrow was expected to be the starter all season. Running back wise, and well, Quinshon Judkins is someone I talked about last week. Unsurprisingly, he popped up and suddenly looked like the starter for Cleveland. Now, that doesn't have a lot of value, but we are still talking about a starting running back in the NFL, someone who is already the starter, and that gives it immediate value. So I'm happy to pick him up. Cam Scatterboo is someone I'm not even slightly excited about, but he was looking like at least a committee back, if not the starter with Tyrone Tracy. I didn't expect that to happen in week 2. That does suggest he does have a solid chance of taking over and winning the role outright. How much value does that have? Probably not a lot. Having said that, I do have to recognize that some of you are going to want to pick up a starting running back for any number of reasons, and he's someone that fits into that category. Even though for me, there are certainly leagues where he was entirely droppable because realistically he has limited upside. If you've already got 3 solid starters, you don't really need someone like a Scatterboo. And the same deal applies to Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. He has limited upside. Even with Austin Eckler out, we're still going to see Jeremy McNichols doing all of the passing work. So for that reason, JCM's really only useful in a non-PPR or half PPR league, or a deeper PPR league where you're going to need him for a bye week replacement, or just to give you some depth because you started 0 RB. And Zach Charbonnet, well, he's actually been playing more snaps and getting more touches than Kenneth Walker, but Walker massively outplayed him last week, so I'm a little bit less excited about him this week. Having said that, he is someone that you can still pick up because you just do not know what's going to happen in this backfield. And if Walker's injured, he is going to get an enormous amount of carries and have a lot of upside. So while they're both playing and getting starts, it's kind of hard to trust either of them, and Walker seems to be the starter after his play last week. Charbonnet is still someone with plenty of value. In a deeper league, or at least players available in more leagues. And I talked about Ramondre Stevenson last week. Going to slide him in there again this week because there aren't too many other starting adjacent options that are worth talking about. He got a way more carries than Travion Henderson last week. Henderson in very shallow leagues is even droppable because realistically, how much do you need the starting back for the Patriots in a very shallow league? Whereas in a deeper league, Stevenson becomes a viable option. I don't believe he's going to keep this role longer term, but he is at least someone that you can start and feel okay about in the short term because he does seem to be the guy getting the majority of snaps at the moment. The reason he's different from Henderson is that he's not going to turn into the every down starter without an injury to Henderson. And even though that if that happens, which seems unlikely. The upside's still pretty limited outside a deeper league. I wouldn't be too interested in him. Speaking of deeper leagues, and Woody Marks kind of started to take away a few touches from Nick Chubb. I'm not particularly excited about him because, again, it's going to take a while before he takes over and actually becomes a clear starter. Could take a couple of months. And even if that happens sooner, how excited are you around the Texans running back? Not to mention the fact that you're always going to have to be nervous about Joe Mixon coming back at some point in time. Marks is a talented player. I thought he would be a very good dynasty stash coming into the season and ranked him a lot higher than most people. Didn't really see this coming. He's not being used on third downs. Dare Ogunbowale is, but he did have a lot more spark than Chubb had this week, and it wouldn't surprise me if he gets some more opportunities moving forward, but you're really only interested in a much deeper league. Same thing with Kenneth Gainwell, who is the clear number 2. It's not Caleb Johnson. It is Gainwell that is playing behind Jalen Warren, and it would only take a Warren injury or Gainwell to even play better because he's getting plenty of opportunities for Gainwell to become very fantasy relevant. And even so, in a much deeper league, he's someone you can start. I'm in the 32-team league, for example, and Gainwell is someone I'm starting weekly because realistically, in that sort of league, he must be started. And finally, Jeremy McNichols, another guy I'm starting in the different 32-team league, is someone you can pick up if you're desperate, given Austin Eckler is out for the season. I do think it's going to be JCM getting most of the touches. Wouldn't be surprised if Chris Rodriguez is activated for that reason on game day and suddenly start sniping some goal line touches potentially, but it's going to be McNichols doing a lot of the passing work, at least initially. Not impossible that JCM will take over and start doing the passing work, but I do think they'll probably lean on McNichols for that for now. Also possible they'll sign someone else off the street. Now, waiver stashes, these are guys who you wouldn't be starting right now, but all of these guys have plenty of upside long-term if there's an injury in front of them. Plus, realistically, if you're in a bye week real issue, those top 2 are guys you can start as well. Trey Benson's getting most of the third down work for the Cardinals, and if there's an injury to James Conner, I think he's someone who suddenly turns into a top 12, top 15 back. Got plenty of upside and probably going to end up in an every down role outside occasional receiving work if there is an injury to Conner, and that's always possible with James Conner. Tyler Algier, similar situation. We saw how he looked with the opportunities he got in the most recent game. Looked pretty solid. If there's an injury to Bijan Robinson, which we haven't seen happen yet, all of a sudden Algier becomes someone I'm probably ranking top 15 as well. That gives him plenty of upside. Plus, if you're desperate on a bye week in a game they're probably leading, then you are going to get a little bit of production out of Algier. Blake Corum started to get a lot more touches for the Rams, and it is clear he's well ahead of Jarquez Hunter. It's not entirely impossible that he does win the role over Kyron Williams because he has looked solid when given the opportunities, and Williams hasn't. So we could see a changing of the guard at some stage. He's someone I'm picking up in a lot of leagues because you not only have the opportunity of a Williams injury, you also have the possibility that Corum wins the job on merit. And finally, DJ Giddens. I just love the possibilities here if we see an injury to Jonathan Taylor. Taylor's playing nearly every single snap, which is great for him for fantasy, and I've got him in a lot of leagues here. I was very high on him in the preseason, but Giddens has a heap of upside if there's an injury to Taylor. I love the fact that they still had Tyler Goodson inactive. They weren't interested in using him at all. This seems to be Giddens' backfield if Taylor is out. Now, it is possible that Goodson's not healthy yet, and that'll change if there were an injury to Taylor, but I still think Giddens would be the main guy. And he's got plenty of upside on what looks like a pretty solid Colts offense. Wide receiver-wise, shallow, and Chris Godwin's starting to get dropped for people. I'm not sure why. When you drafted him, you knew he wasn't going to be playing for the first month or so, and it seems like he's coming back sooner than we expected. He's at least training in a limited fashion. I don't expect him to be good until week 6, 7, 8 sort of region. Ideally, you can stash him on an IR spot, but even if you don't have one, he's still someone with plenty of upside when he comes back, especially in a shallower league. Michael Pittman, I mean, he didn't look good in week 2, but he looked very good in week 1. You're going to have a week-to-week variation with him, but to me, it seems like he's the number 1 receiver. I know Josh Downs is getting involved, and he started playing a few more 2 receiver sets, but Pittman is still the number 1. He looks healthier. He looks like he's in front of Downs. He's someone that's got some upside and someone that you can certainly start, especially in deeper leagues, but even in a shallower league, he's worth picking up because he is a guy we've seen finish as a top 20 receiver before, and he's already playing as a top 20 receiver so far this season. Juwan Jennings finally starting to look better, had a solid game in week 2. He's someone that I feel fine about starting, and so if he's available in your league, pick him up. And Keenan Allen, same sort of situation. He's the 3rd receiver for the Chargers, but we're seeing he's still getting plenty of production and plenty of volume. Even though he's playing behind Quinton Johnston, he's getting a lot more looks than Johnston. And for that reason, he's someone that I'm happy to have on a roster, really in any size league. If we go a little bit deeper, and Darnell Mooney is slowly coming back from injury, they didn't really need to use their wide receivers much last week. Might potentially not have to this week, but he's still someone that you can solidly pick up and know there's plenty of upside, especially if you get a Drake London injury. Wan'Dale Robinson is someone I was quite high on in the preseason, especially in PPR, and he's paying off so far this season as a top 10 wide receiver. I don't see that continuing, but he is still worth a pickup, especially in a PPR league. Romeo Doubs is getting the most snaps by far for the Packers, and I do think even with Jaden Reed out, we're still going to see Doubs be the clear number one guy, even though I think there'll be a more clear top three. Doubs is the guy that's out there all the time. In a deeper league, he's someone you can start. We're talking like deeper 12-team league where you have like, 3 wide receivers or a couple of flex spots, or a 14-team league. That's where Doubs becomes somewhat relevant to you. And Cedric Tillman, for me, not really confident on him. He's not getting the sort of volume that I think he needs to succeed, but he's had touchdowns the first 2 weeks, which is going to make him popular. I could see him growing more into this role, but with the way they're playing and the way they're using Flacco, I find it hard to believe that he's going to be consistent producer most weeks. But in a deeper league, he is someone that you can that's certainly worth rostering at least, especially because he's available in the vast majority of leagues. And if we go very deep, this is one of my favorite pickups of the week, Troy Franklin. Not only did he look very good this week, but he's playing more snaps than Courtland Sutton. Sutton's starting to lose snaps to Pat Bryant, but it's Troy Franklin that's out there every time. And I did not see this coming in the preseason where he was kind of splitting snaps with Devon Vele. All of a sudden, it's Franklin being the number one guy. And Marvin Mims, who was one of my favorite preseason guys, has fallen off and he's become the number 3 guy at best. So Franklin's the guy you want to pick up. Even in a shallower league, he's still worth picking up and benching because I do think there's some upside that he could easily turn into a top 30 receiver or better. Isaac Teslar doesn't have the same upside. He really needs an injury to either Amon-Ra St. Brown or Jamison Williams for him to become a consistent producer. But there's plenty of upside, especially this week as they're taking on Baltimore. That could be a real shootout. So in a very deep league, he's someone you could even consider starting. Even though he's kind of playing behind Khalif Raymond at the moment, I do think they'll use him a fair amount this week, or at least get him on the field. Tyquan Thornton, someone you can probably use for a week or two. You know you can pass on the Giants. Thornton had a good game. He's playing as the number 2 receiver at the moment. It's possible Xavier Worthy's back, but if Worthy's not, then Thornton is a guy that you can consider in a very deep league. And if we're talking extremely deep leagues, a guy that's owned in 0% of leagues, according to, I think this was NFL.com or Sleeper, I can't remember which. That's less than 1 in every 1,000 leagues, at least, because they only go to 1 decimal place, I guess. 2,000 leagues if we're talking rounding. Regardless, Jameer DK is the slot guy for the Tennessee Titans. It was Tyler Lockett, but DK's taken over that role, at least a 50-50 way so far, and I wouldn't be surprised if he continues to take it over. We've got to be talking a very, very deep league before we're considering this as a good option. I've got him in a 32-team league, and he's still in my taxi squad because that one's Dynasty. So we are talking pretty deep, but he's someone that you can pick up in a very deep league, knowing that there is some upside moving forward. And I do like him as a Dynasty pickup in particular. Tight end wise, and Kyle Pitts is interesting. At least they're starting to use a lot more 2 tight end steps, which means they can get Pitts out there instead of using Ray McLeod. That's also because they ran the ball a lot last week, and I think they'll run the ball a lot against Carolina as well, which should give Pitts some touches. He's someone that's certainly worth owning, as is Dallas Goedert, who we know can be a very solid player when given the opportunities. If there's an injury to someone like an AJ Brown, all of a sudden Goddard becomes quite valuable. He's someone that's worth rostering if you need a tight end, even though he's battling injury at the moment. But the guy I like better than both of those guys, and I probably should have ordered it this way, is Juwan Johnson. He's been excellent so far. He was my favorite waiver wire ad last week, and it remains that way. He's playing pretty much every single snap. They're using him plenty. He's getting some touchdown opportunities as well. Johnson is someone I definitely want on my teams if the opportunity arises. Same thing with Brendan Strange. Plenty of upside there. Not as much as Johnson, but he's available in the majority of leagues. They're putting him out there on pretty much every snap. And unlike Johnson, who will probably lose snaps once Fabian Moreau and or Taysom Hill come back from injury, Strange is going to be the number 1 guy all season unless something happens with the depth chart. So Strange is someone that interests me as well. Let's talk kickers and DSTs. John Parker Romo looked excellent for the Falcons, but the reason I'm listing him here, I just love anyone who's playing against the Panthers. They have a tendency to just concede a lot of field goals. And for that reason, I like Romo, not just because he had a great first week taking over from Young Ho Q. Now, Tyler Loop is someone that I've liked for a bit coming into the season. You always generally like Baltimore's kicker a reasonable amount, and he should be in a shootout with the Lions. He's someone that's definitely worth picking up, especially if you're someone that doesn't love streaming kickers. I think Loops is someone you're going to be able to feel okay about starting most weeks. DST-wise and Packers DST, we knew they were going to be good. They take on Cleveland. They're still available in half of leagues, and they're someone I would go about picking up if you want to stream it there. The Falcons DST has been the highest scoring DST. They're not particularly good in general, but they did finally pick up some edge rushes in the draft, and that really showed. They take on the Panthers, who I love targeting with kickers and DSTs and running backs, in fact. So I would happily pick them up and use them this week as well if I'm streaming. Now let's talk droppables, and I've tried to split things up between normal droppables and shallower leagues because I've got people coming at me because they think I'm asking them to drop a player in a 12 or 14 team league. Just giving you some options on guys who are worth dropping. These top guys, I think in most leagues, talking about dropping them. Dylan Sampson is now clearly behind Quinshon Judkins. There's really no point in having him there because he was barely worth starting even when Judkins wasn't there, and now Judkins is in place. He becomes totally unnecessary. Caleb Johnson is the number 3 guy for the Steelers. Don't need him. Austin Eckler, probably not going to play again this season. Jaden Blue, not even active at the moment. You don't need him unless you're in a super deep league or a dynasty league. Jerome Ford only being used as a receiving back, so what's the point? There are other receiving backs with an equal amount of value. You can just go pick one up anytime you want if you really need one. The Quint Allen, some people got excited about what might happen with him. He's at best the third down kind of 2-minute drill back, and probably not even that. You don't need him. Isaac Garendo, clearly behind Brian Robinson. We talked about that last week. And Jaleel McLaughlin has been inactive for 2 straight weeks. You do not need him. Another guy you probably don't really need in a shallower league is RJ Harvey. He was an okay player to consider. He was someone I was considering around maybe the 20s as a running back. When we thought he was going to be the starter, he's clearly not the starter at the moment. It's J.K. Dobbins, and Dobbins is playing fine. Harvey's not playing particularly well. There's no imminent change or reason to change. Then it's not like they're rebuilding or anything. So Harvey's not someone that I particularly want in my lineup unless I have a particularly deep bench, because I think I can probably find more upside elsewhere. I do think Harvey possibly takes over at some stage this season. I think there's a good chance of it, but what's the upside? Do you have maybe a top 20 back if everything goes well, or if you get an injury to Dobbins, but otherwise you're just kind of wasting a space on a guy with lack of upside that you can't use on a weekly basis. Wide receiver wise, and no real shocks here on the first part of the list. Xavier Legette, he's playing behind too many players at the moment. Hunter Renfro is getting a lot of opportunities ahead of him. It wouldn't surprise me if he fades out with Jalen Coker eventually coming back. I just think he can probably do better in most leagues. Demario Douglas has fallen behind Mac Hollins this week. That's a terrible sign. It's not even a team I want the wide receivers of. I definitely don't want Douglas. Luther Burden's still clearly behind Olamide Zacchaeus, and even if he wins that starting job, in most leagues, that's not going to be useful. Marvin Mims, again, just clearly the number 3 for Denver. So little weekly floor that I just can't see you starting him in the majority of leagues. Trey Harris clearly behind the top 3 receivers, and while he was a little bit better this week, he's still not someone that interests me. Adam Thielen, we're going to see the return of Jordan Addison in the next week or so. He comes back in week 4, so Thielen will suddenly become someone who's probably rotating with Jalen Naylor at best. Pat Bryant was starting to get some opportunities, but it was at the expense of Cortland Sutton. It's hard to imagine him taking over from Sutton. So what's the ceiling here? Maybe he starts taking snaps from Marvin Mims, but they still need Mims as that deep threat. Bryant is like Sutton, and we've seen that Troy Franklin's someone they trust. So I just don't see a path to Pat Bryant being relevant this season. Shallower leagues, and some of these will be a little bit more controversial. Travis Hunter just hasn't looked great. The team hasn't looked great. I am concerned that with injuries at cornerback, they're going to use him there more and use him as a wide receiver less. I don't trust this situation at the moment. If you're in a shallow league, there's probably a better option. Same thing with Matthew Golden. Despite the injury to Jaden Reed, Golden has been kind of splitting snaps with Dontavian Wicks. I do think probably that Golden starts to play a little bit more now that we've seen the Reed injury, but even so, his floor is so low that in a shallow league, I'm not interested. Jaden Higgins, we've talked about this before as well. He's barely getting opportunities, playing behind Xavier Hutchinson. That's a bad sign. Longer term, I still think he's someone who's very solid, and I hold on to him in Dynasty. But for now, they're just not using him in any useful way. And even if he somehow takes over from Hutchinson, how much value does that really have? Finally, Rashid Shaheed, he's starting to lose snaps to all sorts of people, mainly Devon Vele, even in 2 receiver sets and in 3 receiver sets, in fact. So that's a little bit scary. He's got a pretty low floor. Don't love the Saints offense in general. If I'm going to play one of them, it's going to be Chris Olave or Juwan Johnson. So not interested in Rashid Shaheed. Quarterbacks and tight ends. I mean, these quarterbacks are guys you shouldn't have on your roster anyway in most leagues. But CJ Stroud's still got a surprisingly high ownership percentage. I don't understand why. JJ McCarthy's injured and he's not looking great. And Matthew Stafford, I'm not really buying it for this season outside a very deep league. Tight end wise, Dalton Kincaid. I mean, he's still got a ceiling there. There is upside if there's an injury to Dawson Knox, but I'm not overly interested in him, especially if you're trying to rely on a tight end to start. I just don't think Kincaid is the guy. Colson Loveland is way behind Cole Kmet. This is pretty common for rookie tight ends to have a pretty quiet first season. He might come on later in the season, but even if he does, how much upside does the Bears tight end have? It's not a position that we've been particularly interested in the past, so I'm not sure why all of a sudden we're interested in a guy who's not even the starter. I'm dropping him for sure. Evan Ingram, I know he's been battling injuries, but he's still in a committee with Adam Trautman. I have no interest in this. I'd put him as my tight end 17 entering the season, and things are going worse than I even expected. Dalton Schultz, we thought might get some opportunities with Cade Stover being injured, but they just used Harrison Bryant in that spot, and he's still not getting targets, so no interest there. Janu Smith's in that horrible committee with Pat Frymuth. You can do better in most leagues. Jake Tonjes, that he interested a lot of people when George Kittle went down, but there's a committee going on with he and Luke Farrell, so I'm not interested in him. And in a shallower league, you probably drop TJ Hawkinson. I probably wouldn't in most leagues, but if you're in a real shallow league, I could see a situation where it makes sense to get rid of Hawkinson. I just think, I know he's not getting the targets. The floor isn't really there. The only real reason for optimism is that Carson Wentz might be the new quarterback. Potentially, he uses him better. And that's all we've got for the Waiver Wire show for this week. Please make sure you hit me up on socials or in the comments below if you've got any questions or comments. I look forward to chatting to you guys in a couple of days' time when I talk about streamers and stashes. And I'm hoping to finally get back into doing start-sit shows on the Saturday as well. So I hope you'll turn up for those as well. I look forward to chatting to you then.